So now we near the end of the Tamers story. And when I first watched this, I felt like this season went on forever, but in that kind of good way. Anyway, when we last left our heroes off in the plot summary, Beelzemon was falling to his death after being attacked by the D-Reaper, while his young Tamers look on in horror. And not gonna lie, I actually thought Beelzemon was gonna die here. I mean, would you put it past the show at this point? But no, Beelzemon gets saved at the last second, and Jerry begins to realize that being trapped in the D-Reaper isn't a good idea. Meanwhile, the government starts sending in stealth planes to drop what everyone thinks are bombs onto the D-Reaper. So Takato and the others just file out of there as quickly as possible to try to come up with a new plan of attack. At the same time, we find out that these planes are not dropping bombs, but electronic pulses. And we also figure out who's organizing this attack on the D-Reaper. That's right, it's Johnny! Oh, thank God he was in this season. Who's Johnny again? Anyway, he cuts out and we don't see him again for a little bit. But then we cut back to Jerry, who is fighting with the... Okay, this is like the D-Reaper's unofficial form. It kind of speaks for it a bit. And it's just like this altered form of Jerry. Or at least it's Jerry clone. But for all story-intensive purposes, this is essentially the D-Reaper. And it actually answers my question that I asked last time as to why the D-Reaper keeps Jerry alive and depressed. I really should have paid more attention to this episode when I watched it again. But apparently it needs Jerry alive so it can feed off its depression as an energy source. Which is almost as dumb as Baggermon's D5, except the D-Reaper's just overall a better villain. So Jerry's like, I want to go home and I don't want to be depressed anymore. And the D-Reaper's like, no, you can't. And then it attacks her with tentacles. And then Jerry starts screaming. And then the D-Reaper attacks itself for reasons I have several theories as to why, but I'm pretty sure they're wrong, so I'm not even going to bother mentioning them. Then the D-Reaper announces that it has enough power to reach its final form, which is easily its coolest looking form, and then it begins to sink into the ooze. Then the scientists just tell the kids to go off and spend time with your family while they formulate a plan on how to deal with this. And I like these scenes for the most part. Rika and Renamons are kind of cute and funny. I like those. Henry's are, you know, actually important to the plot, so I like those. Takato's are just kind of, Honestly, I feel like I'm getting tired of Takato's mopey demeanor at this point. But I don't know why his specifically, because all three of these characters are mopey. They're all sad about Jerry and the D-Reaper and whatnot. Maybe it's because I think Takato has the overall worst character to bounce his emotions off of. Like, Rika's got Renamon and her mom and her grandmom, and they're pretty cool overall. And Renamon has that line that got me yelled at by the internet. And Henry isn't like really moping, he's just kind of overhearing stuff or talking with his dad about how they're gonna fight the D-Reaper. But Takato's got his cousin here, who we're gonna talk about because he's the star of a movie. And it kind of kills me inside that his appearance in Tamers kind of means the movie's canon. But yeah, his cousin here, who I think is named Kai, he is not the best character for helping Takato go through some sort of emotional change. First off, just listen to the way he talks in the English dub.
You guys are, like, out there to save the world or something, huh?
Second off, while Rika and Henry are dealing with characters that they've kind of been around the entire season, Takato gets one carted in from almost a completely different medium. But anyway, Takato confesses that he loves Jerry, which I guess is supposed to be different from the time he did that on the train. Whatever. We also got to see Jerry, who is depressed, and Calamon desperately trying to make Jerry not depressed. And I don't know why, but I find it both kind of funny and slightly disturbing that Jerry argues with her hand puppet. I don't know why. We also hear back from Johnny, who says the sensors that they dropped into the D-Reaper, well, they've discovered that the D-Reaper is inside a quantum bubble with electrons moving faster than the speed of light, and the monster makers figure out the best way to get rid of the D-Reaper is cause a black hole, which will suck the D-Reaper out of the dimension. Okay, it's science mumbo jumbo, whatever. And then Henry's dad scans Terriermon to try to find, like, the compositional differences between Digimon and the D-Reaper, blah blah blah. Then the D-Reaper begins to form with other D-Reapers around the world to create one being, and that'll mean the end of humanity. Then Shibumi has this card which will allow the kids to fight the D-Reaper, and then all the kids reunite to get ready to fight the D-Reaper. Yeah, this whole part has just been a lot of explaining because it's all preparation for the final fight. Because you know what? I have to say, it's looking pretty good. Jerry's popped out of her funk and is now openly resisting the D-Reaper. The monster makers have got this doodlebug program or whatever that's gonna bring it down. And all three heroes are reunited for one last fight. Now, any normal person would look at this and say, you know what? This is pretty good. I'm feeling great about this setup. But not the writers over at the Tamers HQ. They saw this and said, man, this is stuff for pussies. We need to go one step beyond. We need to push the edge. We need to crank it up to 11. 3 heroes is nice, but we think our audience deserves more. And we know what fans want. They want the 4th hero. And you know what? They delivered perfectly. Because I thought this guy was out of the show. But they had me fooled. A clever deception. Just so they could make his triumphant return to the screen that much more surprising and satisfying. Back to complete his mission in this final confrontation is the one, the only, you know him, you love him, Rio. I mean, yeah, of course, Rio. I mean, you know Rio, that rich, interesting character who has a history with the D-Reaper and had that stated mission to save Jerry from it. That was his whole, like, big redemptive arc thing. Seriously, what the hell is this Beelzemon? Beelzemon, by the way, pretty much out of the series. He is gone. He does nothing to contribute to this final section. So, as far as I'm concerned, his big redemptive mission, a complete failure. But hey, the writers had to knock him off so we can shoehorn Rio into this last fight. And I mean shoehorn. Because this lead up to the last fight after they've all scanned the card and all that, it's basically the kids on their way to fight the D-Reaper, just reflecting on how much they changed, you know, for the beginning of the season. And it's a really cool scene. Because the one thing I think Tamers did undeniably well is development. And it is very interesting to see just how much our heroes differ from their episode 1 counterparts. And then you've got Rio here, who's just floating awkwardly because he was introduced halfway through the season, has had like overall 20 minutes total worth of screen time. But the show does give him, I believe, one line where he tries to contribute to our heroes', you know, reminiscent dialogue. Let's see what he has to contribute.
How could I? I was too busy calling myself the Digimon Queen.
You believed it, of course.
And why not? You are the queen, second only to the Digimon King.
Oh, shut up.
Yeah, you don't get to talk anymore. At all. But you know he will. I know it'll be terrible. But yeah, before we have the final fight with the D-Reaper, we have this fight between the heroes and the D-Reaper Sentinels. And then Grani gets hurt. I don't know if I ever mentioned this, but Grani is the name of the arc that became Takato's glider and has sentience. Then the D-Reaper almost kills Calamon and Jerry's upset about it. And then you cut back to Henry's dad, Yamaki, talking about how they have a plan to get rid of the D-Reaper, but they wish they had another way. And then the D-Reaper... I'm sorry if I'm jumping around a lot, but just a lot of stuff is happening in a very short amount of time. It's really cool in the show, but it's very hard to summarize. So anyway, the D-Reaper opens up a portal to connect its real-world form with its Digimon world form. Yeah, the Digireaper's got two different forms, one in the digital world, one in the real world. And once they connect, it will spell the end of both worlds. But this is what the scientists want, because this is when it's at its most vulnerable state and needs to destroy both versions of the D-Reaper to completely wipe it out permanently. And they do this by, you guessed it, engaging the Juggernaut program, which opens up the hole that brings forth the digital D-Reaper into the fight, and the heroes split up, with Takato going to rescue Jerry from the main D-Reaper, while the three other heroes decide to stay and fight this D-Reaper. So Takato starts fighting the D-Reaper, trying to save Jerry. He fails at it pretty hard. But then Grani comes back, and in a sad scene, sacrifices himself to give Takato new super armor. And at this point, I normally complain about the show like elevating one kid above the other, or at least elevating him above the rest of the group. But it's handled well here because it's at the very end of the season, and also the other not-so-privileged kids are not sitting on the sideline. They're actually doing something very important. They're fighting the other D-Reaper. I just thought I'd mention that for something that we are going to talk about much later. But that's the end of the second to last episode. And now we get to the last episode, which starts off with Takato flying, Jerry having escaped the tentacles of the D-Reaper, now actively trying to escape, and this scene. God, just kill me. Okay, so like I said, Takato and Jerry and Calamon are doing their own thing, but what are Henry, Rika, and the other guy doing? Well, it turns out this version of the D-Reaper that they're fighting is really strong. Their attacks don't seem to be doing anything. But that's when Rio comes up with an idea. Basically, he wants Rika to transfer all of her power to his sword so he can cut the D-Reaper. And this is all transcribed to us with dialogue that I'm sure was meant to try to make us feel for this budding romantic relationship. But all it does is make me wish the D-Reaper would just kill both of them.
Or you could die. Did you ever think about that, Hotshot?
Well, then there'll be just one less person to poke fun at you, right, Pumpkin?
You big twerp, you're just doing this to impress me, aren't you?
So is it working or not?
This is the second worst conversation I've ever heard Mosafon take part in. So Rika prays, I guess, and that sends energy to Rio's sword, and armor of hers is stripped off, and his sword grows bigger every time. And everyone makes the joke about sex, so I'm not going to. Also, whenever 10-year-olds are involved, the last thing I try to do is picture them having sex. So instead I began to list in my head all the reasons why this doesn't work as a resolution to Rika's character. Because that is pretty much what this is. The three kids each have a big scene dedicated to them, where it's like their last hurrah. It's the last thing they do in the season. It's some like heroic gesture or whatever. And this is Rika's. Essentially, it is her handing over her power to somebody else so he can do something heroic. Yeah, I mean, it's only the third kid in your group. It's not like she had any sort of conflicts or relationships that could have lent itself to a unique and satisfying ending to her character. Do you see why I feel like Rio just ruins some things? And this is the big one? I mean, we've spent over about 50 episodes with these kids. This is the last episode. This season has put a lot of focus on the characters as individuals. So it's around this time that maybe we should be reflecting on these characters and giving them endings that fit with what we know about them. Not introduce a character over halfway in, then shoehorning him into the final fight and having him take focus away from the endings of other characters. Because the way this plays out, this seems more like an ending for Rio's character than it is for Rika's. Rio is obviously the main focus, and Rio's the one talking about sacrificing himself for the greater good or whatever. And Rika's just off on the sideline just effectively saying, I can't do anything, I'm gonna let this man take care of it. She's not growing or learning anything about herself, it's just, she's right where she was from the beginning, with Rio towering his superiority over her. With the big change in this ending being that now she basically admits that he's superior to her. And with this submission of Rika's will, Rio manages to do something really cool and manages to win his uppity rival as his female prize, as a sort of icing on the cake for the wonder that is Rio. Hey, you know what might have made a better ending for Rika? I don't know, I just had some ideas. You see, what a lot of writers would do in the situation that's been set up here with this sort of rivalry is they would have a scene where the underdog rival, which is Rika, does something to save the life of or overshadow the superior rival, which is Rio, thus making them equal in some way, with neither one able to claim ultimate superiority over the other, thus allowing to continue their quote-unquote cute rivalry, but instead on equal grounds. Or they would have Rika do something cool on her own, separate from Rio. Like, look, okay, in the show, I think they make some sort of big deal about Tsukuyamon only knowing defensive attacks, and that was the reason why she couldn't fight the D-Reaper effectively, and why her giving her power away to Rio would have been the smarter choice, because he actually has, like, offensive attacks. Which is a dumb point to make, because just in the last episode, we saw Tsukuyamon take down a D-Reaper Sentinel that Gargamon couldn't take out, and Gargamon is nothing but offensive attacks, but that's beside the point. They could have had Tsukuyamon use, like, a shield to deflect an attack that the D-Reaper shot at them, and it, like, disrupts a force field or whatever. I don't know. We're dealing with a world full of digital creatures that come to life and are fighting evil computer programs. Be creative. Just find something else for this character to do that doesn't have to heavily rely on someone else. Or instead of having Rika do something with Rio, we have Rika do something with Beelzemon. All that talk that Rio was given about, like, oh, I'm sacrificing myself for the greater good, that just reminded me, wasn't that Beelzemon's whole thing? Sacrificing for the greater good? I mean, you made the comparison to Jesus Christ earlier. You might as well go the full Monty with it. Have him do some sort of possible sacrifice. And Rika and Renamon doing something in tandem with Beelzemon, you know, possibly sacrificing himself to fight the D-Reaper, would actually be better than with Rio, because Rika and Renamon actually have, like, a history with Impmon, have more of a relationship, and this relationship has actually helped develop both of their characters. Unlike Rio, who had a pseudo-relationship with Rika to try to push forward pseudo-development, which actually wasn't even pseudo-development. It wasn't development at all. It was just Rio saying how cool he was, and then the show scolding Rika for not recognizing it. You wanna know what makes this even better? After Rio does his big dumb blade attack, which looks dumb, we learn that it didn't even matter. That's right. The attack doesn't work. The D-Reaper just reforms immediately, so Rika surrendering herself to Rio was completely pointless. The Digimon Sovereign just come in at the last second and drag the D-Reaper down. Thanks for helping, guys, because these three obviously weren't going to do anything helpful. So, yeah, that's actually my biggest problem with this ending. It is basically Rio. I believe that he robs Rika and Beelzemon, two of my favorite characters in the entire series, of decent resolution to their arcs. But let's try to keep moving and talk about somebody else. Let's see. Hey, Jerry, you're not disappointing me. But you are doing stuff that's kind of weird. Okay, so Jerry is still trapped in the D-Reaper, and she's trying to think of a way out, so she prays into her Digivice, and then Leomon, from beyond the grave, manages to shoot laser beams out of it, which destroy parts of the D-Reaper and cause an opening where she can hopefully be rescued by Takado. Preferably before this goo engulfs her. Meanwhile, the D-Reaper's Jerry clone decides to directly confront Takado and starts lecturing him about how humans don't deserve life, they only deserve annihilation, and Takado's like, yeah, well, who died and made you king, jerk, and then they fight. And while that's going on, the Sovereign drag this version of the D-Reaper down into, like, a place in between the digital world and the real world, and that's when Henry's dad pops up and says that he actually implanted the Juggernaut program into Terriermon, and that if they manage to spin really fast and suck the D-Reaper down into this area, they can set it off and it will completely destroy all traces of the D-Reaper permanently. But before they can do that, Takado has to rescue Jerry, and he's still fighting the D-Reaper and kind of losing. But then he musters up his courage by remembering his friends or something, and punches the D-Reaper in the stomach, causing it to dissolve, which I have to admit I thought was pretty cool. But oh no, Henry's spinning really fast and it's sucking the D-Reaper into this netherworld with Jerry inside. But it's okay. Jerry managed to escape with Calamon, and the D-Reaper is seemingly destroyed. But oh no, Shibumi said he screwed something up and now the kids are all gonna lose their mega level and be trapped in this place. And probably die. But it's okay, Kenta's here to save them with magic bubbles. And for those of you keeping track at home, this means Kenta, yes, this kid, yeah, this kid too, yes, this kid has done more to save Jerry than Beelzemon. In fact, you could probably make a strong case saying that in this last episode, Kenta's done more meaningful stuff to save Jerry than Rika and Rio, which is just sad. And actually, this ending with Kenta kind of bothered me a little bit because it always just seemed really forced that the kids lose their mega level and then immediately get saved by Kenta. It's like they could have just never lost mega. But then I kind of laugh a bit because I just imagine the writers in a room talking about how they're going to end the season, and the head writer just goes, and then Kenta flies in with a magic shield and protects everyone from the D-Reaper. And then just one guy goes, wait, can't Sakuyamon create magic shields? Why do we need Kenta? Because there is no Sakuyamon because of algorithms. But oh no, Terriermon's still down there, but it's okay because the bubbles save him. Anyway, fight's over now, the D-Reaper is gone, and we have one more scene left to talk about. And that is the bittersweet ending. Because as our heroes, stand triumphantly looking upon the world they saved, Impmon reappears to ask forgiveness from Jerry, and she kinda gives it. And it's kind of a heartwarming scene until the Digimon all of a sudden start glowing and be digivolving. Henry's dad shows up and explains that this is all according to plan, because in order for the Juggernaut program to work effectively to destroy the D-Reaper, it would also mean having to send the Digimon back to the digital world. And he didn't tell Henry or the other kids that he was doing this because he knew they would never accept the plan and wouldn't participate in it. And I actually really find this twist in character kind of interesting, because with this twist, Henry's dad is not being evil. He's being rather reasonable. He's sacrificing these Digimon in order to save both the human and digital world. He's not even killing them, he's just sending them away. But the basic premise is very similar to Yamaki's attitude during the first arc. Sacrificing the few good Digimon in order to destroy all the bad Digimon and thus save Earth. And that was the type of attitude that Henry's dad kept projecting. But as time went on, Yamaki did soften up. But also apparently in that same time span, Henry's dad became hardened and began to see the relationship that his son had with his Digimon as expendable, for the greater good. So as all the Digimon are forcefully sucked back into the digital world out of their tamers' hands, Henry's dad begs his son for forgiveness. I do know that in different languages, Henry gives different responses. I think in the Japanese, he implies that he does forgive his dad, but in the English version, it kind of implies that he doesn't, which is harsh. But still, the kids are confident that they will see their Digimon partners again one day. And then the season ends with an epilogue given by Takado about how the world kind of went back to normal a couple weeks later, which I kind of don't believe, but still, everything is exactly the way it was before the Digimon ever came to the digital world. But he still goes and checks Guillimon's little nest area to see if he's there, and the season officially ends with Takado discovering a pathway to the digital world, implying that yes, they do reunite. Welp, Tamers is done. I don't mean to sound egotistical by grading myself, but I think when it came to my critique of Tamers, I was both tough but fair. Digimon Tamers to me is a really good show. It is easily the best season ever produced by this series. The season tries a lot of new things and takes a lot of risks, and those give this season a very distinctive feel. In fact, I would say that this season is much more of a standout than its predecessor, Frontier, which a lot of fans regard as the black sheep of the series. But we'll talk about all that later. Right now, how about I just do a quick rundown of the pros and cons of this season, and then we'll say goodnight, alright? What this season does right? Well, its handling of the hero characters and their Digimon and the relationship between the two. I felt it was slow, but not boring, and it had a very rewarding climax for most of them. And I also liked how it felt that Guilmon, Terriermon, and Renamon were just as much a part of the story as Takado, Henry, and Rika. And this is what I kind of have been talking about, the benefits of having a small group as opposed to a large one. It allows writers to kind of narrow in and develop relationships easier and manage their time better, which is good when you have a limited number of episodes that you have to have your story completed by. And you can definitely see the benefits of this. Takado has got to be my favorite main kid. Terriermon has to be the greatest Digimon partner I think there's ever been. And Rika is just my favorite character in the series overall, for reasons I already mentioned. And just to kind of round this whole theme off, the D-Reaper, Beelzemon, and Yamaki are all in my top 5 favorite villains of Digimon. I know I kind of ragged on Yamaki a lot, but overall in the story I enjoyed his character. And I was originally going to cheat and say that the entirety of Hypnos was one of my favorite villains because that included Yamaki, his technicians, Henry's dad, the monster makers, and this guy. But I thought that was kind of cheating. And I thought Yamaki kind of is supposed to represent all of them, especially at the end when he's kind of the leader of the adults. And also, I feel that the season overall is kind of lacking strong villains in most seasons. So, slim pickings. I also like the setting. I already went over a lot of this. The last thing I will mention that I like is the ending. The last 3 episodes I think are, for the most part, very well done. Minus the mistakes that I mentioned, this is easily, I think, the best ending this series produced. I think it's got great action. I didn't really go over it, but the fights with the D-Reaper Sentinels and the D-Reaper Jerry clone I think is really cool. It's quick, it's fast-paced, which is something you didn't really see a lot from final fights in Digimon. And although I think me trying to summarize the ending made it seem discombobulating at times, it's not. It's actually handled very well with all the characters doing separate things to fight the D-Reaper, like the adults doing computer stuff, and Henry doing this, and Takado doing that. It all flows very nicely in the story and adds a sort of urgent feel. It doesn't seem too disjointed at all. And the bittersweet ending that this season has is also probably the best one in the series. I swear to you, I watched this season with somebody who hated anime, hated animated cartoons just in general, and they were crying by the end of this. They just thought this ending was so sad and the characters so likable, and the fact that it just kind of gets you, like it kind of catches you off guard, whereas in, let's just say, Adventure, when the kids are told that they have to give their Digimon up, they get like an hour or so to mull it over and say goodbye, and then they leave. This one is, you get 30 seconds to say goodbye to your Digimon, and then your Digimon are forcefully ripped out of your arms and then fly away. God, this season just knows how to hit you sometimes. But anyway, let's talk about the things this season does wrong. I think the handling of villains like Yamaki weren't the best. The second arc is terrible. And of course, Rio. I hope this season really kind of explains why I hate him so much. That was literally half the reason I decided to do Tamers in this critique in the first place. The other half was for me to try to explain why I thought Data Squad was more entertaining than Adventure. But we'll get to that. This, I hope, sets the record straight on my thoughts on Rio. I just feel that he robs so many characters of so many missed opportunities that could have just made them better. And that ending just pissed me off so much because you could see that ending was supposed to have Beelzemon in it. You could see that it had just been leading up to this moment where Beelzemon would possibly sacrifice himself in a fight against the D-Reaper to save Jerry. All the setup was there, all the symbolism was there. It just seemed like it was the most logical thing to do. But somebody said, well, we gotta knock off Beelzemon so Rio can save the day. And it's just so disappointing because it turns what could have been a fantastic ending into an ending that's still better than all the other endings, but just, you can see there was so much more to it. There was just so much missed potential for a lot of characters. It just kind of made me feel a bit empty at the end. But I'm going to meet the people that rapidly defend this season halfway and say that a lot of the mistakes and a lot of the missteps that this season took seem to be out of the head writer's hands. It seems like its biggest obstacle was time and the number of episodes it had to be completed by, which is just something that you're always going to have problems with. And in one very specific case, the writers had a problem with the company meddling and forcing in a character that they didn't really seem to want, and thus struggled to write and develop him. So in conclusion, this season is not perfect. It does things right and it does things wrong. But I feel that its pros way outweigh its cons. I was really excited to talk about this and kind of get all my thoughts out there because this is the season that I easily most reference when I'm trying to show examples of good writing or good development. So I'm glad that now people may have a better reference for what I'm talking about when I give examples. So I hope you enjoyed this little critique. I know I did. But we're not done with this universe. We still have 2 movies to talk about. But until then, play me out, Boss Tones.